Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where do you want to go today? What do you want to do? I've got quite a lot on my mind. I have a strange suspicion that I might have sort of come to a slightly better understanding of the strange political tides that are waxing and waning on this planet at the moment. I don't know whether I've ever really understood before why people lumped together the rise of Jeremy Corbyn with the Brexit vote, or to a slightly lesser extent, now that we know the sort of white supremacist roots that lie at the heart of Donald Trump's base. I don't think it's fair on Brexit voters or Jeremy Corbyn fans to draw too many parallels between the three, but this sense that something can be done differently unites the three, doesn't it? I was following Corbyn's speech yesterday, and I'm not going to lie to you, I was really envious of people who were cheering him. I really wished I could find a way to get on board. When do you think a country moves from being grateful for stability to being envious of other people's material wealth? From being grateful for the calmness that you've got? For example, immediately after a war, even if you lost it, there's going to be a slight sense of relief that it's over. If you've spent the last 5 years living in fear of a bomb landing on top of your house, you're probably not going to be that covetous of a bigger house. You're going to spend at least a few years just being grateful that there's no longer any risk of a bomb dropping on your house. Similarly with money, you know, if you've ever been properly hungry, how long after knowing with some degree of certainty that your belly will be full tonight, how long after that do you start coveting other things? Do you see what I mean? I've never really wanted for anything in my life, but that is a slightly odd observation to make, because I have wanted lots of things. I still do. But I've never wanted for anything, really. If you've ever been genuinely hungry, how long after, knowing that you won't be hungry again in the foreseeable future, do you start hankering after other stuff, like a car or a bigger house or whatever it may be, or more money? I just have this sense, and I'm going to need your help with this, I just have this sense that what Corbyn represents is an acknowledgement of what many people feel is the immutability of the status quo. And that ties in with Brexit, doesn't it? This sense that, look, things aren't working for me. So I remember taking calls from nice people who just said, I've got nothing to lose, especially after the vote. People said, you don't know, I've got nothing to lose. And I'm like, you have. It sounded like my 9-year-old then. I'm like, you have. Come on. I'm like this, and she was like that, and so I'm like, yeah, right, like, I'm saying you have got stuff to lose. If you've got a job, you've got stuff to lose. If you're keeping the wolf from the door, you've got stuff to lose. If you work for Bombardier in Northern Ireland, you've got stuff to lose. You have got stuff, but it doesn't feel like we have, because personal finance, is it that simple? When you literally tot up everything going out and everything going in, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know then why you've got the kind of wealthier side of it, because on the Brexit side, there's no way anybody's doing that on behalf of people who've got less than them. But your middle-class Corbynister, if you will, perhaps feels, even if it does come at some personal cost to them, people who need help most are more likely to get it. So I'm watching this speech yesterday, and I'm slightly spooked by elements. I'm going to say cultish. Come on, singing Happy Birthday. I think Diane Abbott deserves everything that was said about her by Jeremy Corbyn yesterday, just as Laura Kuenssberg would have deserved everything said about her and the threats that she's faced in recent months if Jeremy Corbyn had bothered to acknowledge them. And I don't particularly rate Diane Abbott as a politician, for the record, but weirdly I find it incredibly easy to criticise her as a politician without being misogynistic, racist or bigoted. It's weird that. You know, you can sit here and criticise a politician without having to mention her colour, mention her ethnicity, mention her gender, mention her romantic past, mention anything about her, except her political interventions. It's easy, you know, when you know how. Stick with me and I'll teach you if you want. So he was right to do that, but then to sing Happy Birthday, it was just weird. It was childlike, actually. Not necessarily in a good way, although it was... Cultish is too lazy. What's the best word to use? No, come on, I don't like cultish, because there's no such thing as a positive cult, really, is there? Don't say Christianity, all right? Otherwise I'll have to say 10 Hail Marys for you on Sunday. But there's no such thing as a positive cult. It's cultish. So why did I watch it thinking... I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking, James, you should really be paying for therapy, not just using me as a whetstone and a sounding board at 10 o'clock every morning to explore your own personal political psychodrama. But my personal political psychodrama works across broader spectrums. A lot of people share it. And I was trying yesterday to work out why I wanted to love Jeremy Corbyn. And I think the reason is because he actually acknowledges some of the things I recognise and despair about. So I despair about property, housing, the fact that we have thousands. Look at what happened after Grenfell. What was the biggest lesson you learnt from Grenfell? Apart from the obvious paucity of council provision, the astonishingly Victorian attitude towards poor people, and the almost... what would you almost call it, the kind of Nazi levels of callousness that were displayed by some members of our society afterwards towards people who'd lost everything in the fight. Apart from all that, I couldn't believe how many empty houses they counted in the immediate environs. So all this talk about housing shortages, it completely overlooks the number of homes that are empty. In the rich parts of town, they're empty because it's a better investment than gold bullion or the FTSE 100 at the moment. It's changing now, but just sticking all your money in a mansion in Belgravia, even if you lived in Krakow or Moscow, it was a better investment than almost anything else legal you could find in the world. So I think there's something fundamentally broken at the heart of property. Again, as with almost every problem in this country, the reason why the problem has been allowed to fester for so long is because liars blamed it on immigration. So as soon as you blame it on immigration, you take away any responsibility of government to do anything about it. I think I know why we've got a housing crisis in this country, and I think it's linked to something that we've discovered together on this programme. We've got a housing crisis in this country because at some point in the 1980s and 90s, and I'm too young to know precisely when, we stopped looking at property purchases on the basis of how much a house was worth and started looking at them instead on how much I could borrow. So you didn't go out and buy a house based on what it was worth. This is how these inflations and these enormous rises were able to occur. This house is worth £80,000. There's 3 people that can buy it for £80,000, okay? The most you're reasonably going to be able to borrow on a salary of £20,000 is £60,000. So you need to have 20 grand in the bank. You can borrow £60,000. The house is worth £80,000. The house is still worth £80,000 at tea time, but the next morning, the banking system changes, regulations are lifted, and I could actually now go out and borrow £120,000. I still want that house, right? And the other 2 people who could spring for the 80 grand, they want it as well. So one of them bungs in a £90,000 offer. Suddenly the house is worth £90,000, not because the house is worth £90,000, but because suddenly you were able to borrow £90,000 when previously you would never have got more than 60 with your £20,000 deposit. Then another lender comes along and says, you don't need a deposit. I'll give you £100,000. You don't even need a deposit. This happened to me. This actually happened to me. I told you yesterday. So I then go along and say, right, I'm bidding 100 for that because I can get a £100,000 mortgage without having any deposit whatsoever. The house isn't worth more than it was yesterday. I'm just able to borrow more than I was yesterday. So this, you know what I'm like. I've got an almost fetishistic desire to find keys that unlock complicated issues. It's why I love this job and love the fact that I can talk to you every day and you either make me feel a little bit silly in a nice way because I've jumped the gun and got a bit carried away with the fruits of my thinking, or we together think, actually, do you know what? Maybe there is something in this. So I've spent years looking at property, talking to you about it, despairing for my children's future, because even if they earn what I earn now, my kids couldn't buy the house that I live in now. And that seems odd. That seems anomalous. That seems like backwards travel. So I've looked for years at it. I've spoken to you. I've heard your theories about rent control, some of which Jeremy Corbyn touched on yesterday. I've heard your theories about the old French meaning of the word mortgage as a sort of death tax designed to keep you in hock to the money lenders for the rest of your life. And I didn't recognise that. And I've tried to work out why everything's gone so bonkers. And that's all I've got. And I think it's right. I think that property started going nuts in this country. And in fact, this immigration versus empty houses argument is over, really, under this analysis, because the reason why you keep a house empty is because you're making so much money out of it. It's got nothing to do with how many people are living here if there's hundreds of thousands of empty homes. And why are they so ludicrously priced? Because Margaret Thatcher, I think, and I'm open to historical correction on this one, completely revolutionised regulation in the city in the 1980s, which meant that you could start lending money like it was going out of fashion. Now, why would anybody want to lend money like it was going out of fashion? Because for every 5 people that default on that £100,000 mortgage, 95 people won't. So, yeah, I can suck up the people that should never have been lent the money in the first place, because I'm making it hand over fist on the people that can pay it back. And even the ones that can't pay it back are going to try to do so for years. So I'm going to get their interest payments, and then again, under deregulation of the city in the 80s, I can just take a bunch of these debts, some of them toxic, some of them bad, and pack it all together and resend it and then sell it onto another city institution, and they'll stick it through an algorithm and sell it onto another city institution. So by the time the tide goes out, by the time all these people who've been lent money that they should never have been lent turn out not to be able to repay it, the people who have actually made a profit on that deal are a million miles away from the action. I had no idea that was going to come out of my mouth when the light went on at 10 o'clock this morning. I was supposed to be talking about Jeremy Corbyn singing Happy Birthday to Diane Abbott. But I think the reason why I envy you so much, if you're on the Corbyn bus, is because you don't need that complicated detail, that sort of slightly unhinged thinking. You just see someone who's saying, this isn't right, and no one else is. To Theresa May, I'm not going to lie to you. I tried to listen to her speech a moment ago. I nearly fell asleep. I'm supposed to be getting my adrenaline levels up at 9:45 in the morning. She's human mogadon, which is actually the nicest thing you can say about somebody who told you specifically that she was going to do brilliant trade deals with America as a way of calming your conniptions about Brexit. She's now talking, or the front page of the Telegraph's now talking about a trade war with the same country before any deals, any signatures have been signed. So I look at her and I just see someone who's desperately trying to keep the old ways alive. And the old ways, I'm not a communist, I'm not a Marxist, I'm a middle-class bloke, I'm comfortable with all sorts of elements of capitalism, but the old ways are making the rich people richer and everybody else poorer. Everybody else poorer. Whether it's, a middle-class 30-something who can't quite believe that she's never going to be a property owner, or whether it's a shelf stacker on minimum wage who can't quite believe that they have actual negative balances left over at the end of the month when they live like paupers. So is that it? I know it's simplistic, but when you look at Jeremy Corbyn, is it simply the fact, because you look at the list of things that he got cheered for yesterday, the idea of property, the idea of parity in the workplace, that's a slightly more political rather than economic policy. But he just seems to look at Britain today and say, we can't carry on like this. That's not good enough for me. I don't want to insult you, but I need to know what the solution is before I can really get on board. But is it enough? And this is where the parallel with Brexit perhaps would be, although, of course, what everybody who voted for Brexit is realising now is that things were a hell of a lot better than we realised because we couldn't compare them to what they're going to be like. But is that it? Is it just that Corbyn, and I need you to tell me this, as ideally someone perhaps who's made the journey relatively recently, is it just that he stands up and doesn't presume that he has to operate within the parameters of the status quo? Is that it? Because if that is it, I'm really, really jealous. I wish I could cheer for that, because I really, really welcome it and I really relish it and I really value it. A politician in Britain to stand up and say, guess what? We don't have to jump. We don't have to shout how high when the FTSE 100 chief executives say jump. We don't have to get into bed with big business and let them ride roughshod over the rights of ordinary working people in this country just for paying us the privilege of opening up a profitable business in the middle of the city. We don't have to do things like this. We don't have to have a property market that is completely corrupted by the ease with which you can borrow huge amounts of money. And the only reason why they've made it easy to borrow huge amounts of money is because people make huge amounts of money from lending huge amounts of money to people who shouldn't be allowed to borrow huge amounts of money. 18 minutes after 10. I think I've solved everything. Give me a call and tell me what I've got wrong. A mate of mine reminded me yesterday that not all my political predictions of the last 12 months come true. I did say at one point on the programme that I thought Hillary Clinton was going to pull out of the presidential campaign on the grounds of her health. I got that completely wrong. So take this with a pinch of salt, but I think Corbyn will be Prime Minister. Barring some astonishing act or intervention, I can't quite see how it won't happen now. Because as the Brexit mess gets bigger, the tendency of the right wing of the Tory party, the sort of Johnson, Fox, Davis axis, to tug them ever further towards the cliff edge rather than admitting a mistake. Pride and ego will lead them towards a hard exit. A hard exit is a disaster. Jeremy Corbyn is putting together a Brexit plan. They don't have one. And therefore, perhaps, in fact, probably, this strange groundswell of support that you've seen across the country will translate into parliamentary seats. I think he's going to end up Prime Minister, and I still don't really know why everyone is so excited about that prospect, unless it is simply the case. I've just made a short list. Property, wages, unchecked profiteering, working environment, terms and conditions, job security, education, NHS, all of these things he is saying could be done differently. He's not really saying how, but I think that his appeal is built upon the simple acknowledgement of the fact that the way they're being done at the moment hurts most of us, or doesn't help most of us. Have you got a more sophisticated analysis? And if so, can I borrow it? Stephen's in Leeds. Stephen, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I think that it's right what you say in the sense that people want stability with what's going on politically. You look at Trump, you look at Merkel, you look at the far right, you look at North Korea. And I agree with your analysis on the envy of why people like Corbyn, because I understand why I think that they do, but I can't get it.
You can't get on board yourself. What's your political pedigree, if you don't mind me asking? What's your history?
Well, Labour,
yeah.
traditionally.
I was hoping you were going to say that, because that makes it a more interesting difficulty. If you're a fully paid up member of the Monday Club, I wouldn't be that confused about why you can't get on the Jeremy Corbyn bus.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, his views on Trident, his views on the historical history. The historical way that he dealt with Libya, the IRA.
See, the IRA thing troubles me, but I'm not going to allow it to necessarily influence my ability to get on board his economic policies now. The problem is, people are ringing me from a slightly more enthusiastic point of view, but when I say I'd love to be cheering for him, I'd love to have been in that room feeling this waft of warmth that went all over the conference hall, and I can't, nor can you, so then I try to work out what they're feeling that we're not. And I think it is just, isn't it? Just simply saying, in a moribund political landscape where it's been hard for generations to put a cigarette paper between major party leaders. Tony Blair described himself as the heir to Thatcher. David Cameron described himself as the heir to Blair. It's ridiculous. Jeremy Corbyn stands up and says, here's something complete, and now, in the words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. And that's it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a sense of political change throughout the globe. You look at Trump, you look at...
Well, that's the thing, except that Trump is selling an ancient lie. He's selling the notion that if you build a wall and stop Mexicans coming in, then somehow coal will start appearing magically again in the ground and you'll be able to get it out without damaging the environment. But he is appealing to that sense that things don't have to be like this, but he's appealed to it from the toxic racist angle rather than, if you would, the idealistic socialist angle.
Yeah, absolutely. You bang on there, and I think there's a move for change, and there's a move for political shift, but I think it's got to be managed very, very, very carefully and very delicately.
I'm intrigued by that, because of course Bernie Sanders proves our point, doesn't he? Because with Bernie Sanders, who also drew a lot of people who possibly would have voted for him if he'd beaten Hillary Clinton, he managed to cite this things don't have to be like this without uncorking the white supremacist genie that Donald Trump seems to go to bed with every night.
Well, this is the thing. This is the genie that Donald Trump goes to bed with, that a lot of the working class Americans go to bed with as well.
And a lot of working class Germans and middle class. So yesterday I made my feelings clear about trying to conflate working class with racist. It's a profoundly clever tactic undertaken by minor public school boys and girls, desperate to sort of impose their own bigoted worldview on a country by claiming that they somehow speak for ordinary working class people. I know a lot of ordinary working class people who at least would describe themselves such, and there's not a white supremacist among them. 10:27 is the time. Is it simply the fact, or is it simply the case that Corbyn offers a belief that things don't have to be like this? And if you're punting beliefs, you don't need evidence. In fact, that's the whole point about beliefs, isn't it? They're built on faith, not fact. Jenny is in Luton. Jenny, am I being unfair or am I bang on the money?
No, well, I think I can remember the time when things changed in politics, and that was when Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, and things have got worse and worse since then. Now we have a politician who says there is such a thing as society, and it matters, and you matter, and people feel that. I mean, he's not right about everything.
So he hits you right in the feels.
Yeah. And he's not right about everything. There's lots of things I wouldn't say he's right about. I don't think he's right about Brexit. I don't think he's right about a few things. But I'd be voting for his overall attitude
as an act of faith, because he appears to believe that things can be done differently, and so do you, and you don't need that much detail yet, because nobody else appears to believe it's even possible to challenge the way things are done at the moment.
That's certainly part of it, yes.
But you need more than that, don't you? This is where I envy you, because what else have you got on top of that? Because you just mentioned that, you know, a previous caller mentioned Trident, you've mentioned Brexit. They're arguably the two. That's our national military security and our generations, hence economic security, both up the spout under him, arguably, and yet you're still on side.
Well, I'm on side because he supports the NHS, he supports decent education.
What does that mean? I support Kidderminster Harriers. It doesn't mean they're going to win the FA Cup.
No, I know.
It's no good just cheering. You got to sit there in the stadium at Agborough going, come on, you Reds. It doesn't matter how loud you support them, or indeed how many other poor sods are behind me. The team is still going to get spanked from pillar to post by Curzon Ashton of a weekend.
Well, yes, but I think he's got policies that will back the NHS.
So what you look at and see is, I look at Conservatives now, and I look at especially these sort of very scary neoliberal Brexiteers, the ones who are kind of getting ready to carve us up and sell us off to the highest international bidder just so that they can clear their commissions. They don't seem to believe that the NHS is protectable. You get all the UKIP people queuing up to say it should be privatised while claiming that they somehow represent ordinary people. He just seems to believe, and I think he does, genuinely and passionately believe, that the NHS should be as close to the principles of its inception as is humanly possible. And you don't need him to tell you how he's going to do that, because it's such a blessed relief and alternative to the people who seem to want to carve it up and sell it.
Yeah, I'm with you to some extent. I think the word that you're looking for from the conference was messianic.
Yes.
And I don't like that. That's something I'm not keen on.
No, but maybe that's what we need. I mean, I found myself thinking, you know, imagine if he had charisma. If he had charisma, he'd be the absolute package. He'd be the absolute boy. Same with Theresa May, actually. I think the two least charismatic politicians ever perhaps to lead major parties. But yes, so it is belief. And the change, I guess, comes when you don't think that faith versus fact is over and done with before you've even started arguing the toss. If you're coming here with faith and I've got a fact, then you lose. But I haven't got a fact. I can't prove to you factually that Jeremy Corbyn is wrong about everything. And I would like to believe that his belief that things can be different is enough to somehow make things different. Do you reckon I'm going to be a Corbynista by 11 o'clock today? Stay tuned to find out the jungle mix of the programme today. I hope you're enjoying the slightly new way of addressing issues. Is it this, right? I'm just fascinated by Jeremy Corbyn. I know you are as well, whether you think that he's a representative of all that is evil in the world, or whether you've got a slightly more open mind, or whether you think he's not a naughty boy. He is actually the Messiah. Is it just this? Nobody thinks they're going to get better if we carry on like we are. Nobody does. So when I look at, you know, the prospect of moving up to the next level economically, like getting, you know, I don't know what it would be, a bigger house or a swimming pool or something like that. I'm never being dishonest with you. I'm very lucky, I do well. But when I think about moving on to the next level, it's going to involve, you know, writing a book that becomes a bestseller, or it's not going to involve just cracking on with what I'm doing now and getting better and better and better at it. And I'm on the right side of history at the moment. If you're on the wrong side of history and you're looking down that road and you're just thinking, well, I haven't had a pay rise for 7 or 8 years. I'm never going to be better off. And I don't just mean in terms of the pound in your pocket. The NHS is not going to get, the waiting lists are not going to get shorter. The number of beds is not going to get bigger. The way things are now, my life is only going to be incrementally worse with every passing year. Jeremy Corbyn stands up and offers such a radical alternative to the way things are now that people feel, well, I'm on a losing wicket with him. And this is why I tie the parallel with Brexit. If you were sold Brexit on the strength that things are getting worse and will continue to do so unless we undertake this massive change, then it works, doesn't it? This is the point. Every single person listening to this programme, with a very, very few exceptions, doesn't think that the system as it stands is going to make their life better. You know, public services are deteriorating. Austerity has seen cuts to things that we used to consider to be essentials. The police morale is in freefall. Numbers are in decline. Everywhere you look has a managed decline, while simultaneously people are making lots of money at the top. And Jeremy Corbyn seems to represent the belief that things don't have to be this way. And that is all you need, I think. Unless you're cursed like I am with a what? Because now I'm going to pat myself on the back for being so inquisitive. No. Unless you're cursed with, I possibly have been conditioned into, here you go, you've said it for me. Are you waiting for permission to support Corbyn, James, says this text. You agree with many of his policies. You've been conditioned against him. Wake up, see the Matrix. I used to work for the Daily Express. It was a left-wing newspaper at the time. I spent most of my working life in the media. We don't acknowledge the possibility that slightly more socialist policies could work in this country. We haven't done since 1979. Prior to that, they did, arguably, up to a point. It was the most socialist thing in the history of the civilised world, probably the British NHS and or the British welfare state. Two of the things in this country that most of us are proudest of. Anyway, I'm banging on. I'm having a bit of a, what would you call it, a political crisis? Something slightly more positive than a crisis. But I need interrupting. Peter is in Lewis. Peter, what made you pick up the phone?
James, I picked up the phone. Good morning to you.
Hello,
I picked up the phone because I think I'm one of the converts you were looking for earlier.
Good. Go on.
I'm a 55-year-old, white, middle-class, home-owning guy living in Lewis in sleepy East Sussex. You know, I'm all right, Jack. Life's been good to me.
Yes.
And the reason I'm a convert is you know, really very clear as far as I'm concerned. What else is there? And, you know, there's a number of...
More of the same is the answer, isn't it?
Well, more of the same. But at the moment, you used the phrase earlier, faith versus fact. Faith versus fact.
Yes.
I'd say at the moment it's faith versus disarray and chaos. And, we've got a government running the country at the moment that's actually been decried by the United Nations for the way it's treating our disabled people.
Isn't that astonishing? I was aware of that story, and yet until Corbyn said it yesterday from the podium, I probably hadn't really acknowledged the profundity of that accusation.
It is quite extraordinary.
Isn't it?
And when I hear people describing Corbyn, as I say, I'm not a natural Corbynista, or I'm not a natural Labour voter. I've never voted Labour before. But when I hear people describing Corbyn as radical, I listened to him yesterday, and I listened to him a great deal over the last couple of years. I haven't actually heard him say anything radical yet. What I think is radical is having a government who the United Nations are decrying for their treatment of the disabled. That's just one example.
Yeah, well, it's a brilliant example, and the distorting lens of our media, which is, I mean, even people like me who pat themselves on the back every day for being able to see through the cant. I said cant. I'm not talking about any specific members of the British media. I have been conditioned by it. I sort of think, no, don't be daft, silly old sausage, bearded idealist, can't possibly work.
I think that's absolutely the case, and I think we need to...
Well, help me. Lead me over the line, Peter. How do I get into your fold?
Well, I think before you can get into the fold, you have to consider what's on the other side. And quite frankly, this whole business is so much broader than Brexit. I think that,
of course,
the Brexit has tended to hijack the whole political debate. But all I would say is that if it weren't for Brexit, God alone knows what this current crowd would be getting up to in terms of UK policies. But that's another story.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that silver lining. I'll take any silver lining you've got. But, of course, I mean, post-Brexit, if they actually pull it off and get out and start dismantling generations of worker protection and regulation, then things would probably be even worse. But I'll take that silver line. And it is that simple then. So people look at the way things are being done and don't see any way in which their society, not their personal pound in the pocket, I got that wrong, society will improve. Whether you can afford private education and private health or not, you want to live in a country where people who can't get a decent education and a decent provision of healthcare.
That's absolutely fundamental. That's the country I want to live in, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I've done fine, thank you very much.
Sure.
But I wanted to live in a society that actually does care for the people around me, and I suspect that is the vast majority of the people in this country too.
And the fact that Jeremy Corbyn wants to is, at this point in time, a bigger issue than the question of whether or not he actually can do?
Well, I also think you have to say at this point in any electoral cycle, actually what would the opposition, whoever they were, be telling you in terms of hard fact? I don't think that looking at Corbyn and looking at the Labour Party as it stands now is really any different from looking at any party in opposition. If you're trying to really pin down piece by piece, manifesto promise by manifesto promise, what would actually change, I think, sadly, we never get that with any of them.
No.
But I do think that we are in such a dismal place, in such a low point in the politics in this country, that actually the question really is, if there is an election tomorrow, how else could you vote? Could you, in all consciousness, vote for Theresa May and everything that she represents now? I as a non-voting, as a non-Labour voting man, I believe strongly everybody should vote.
Sure.
I pose that question to myself, and it answers itself very clearly.
And may I ask how you voted in the past, or would you plead the fifth?
No, I've voted Lib Dem in the past. I'm a strong believer in third-party politics for lots and lots of reasons that a lot of people disagree with. I disagree with a great deal of what the Lib Dems have done and said. I agree with a lot of it, but I strongly believe that we need to head towards a more cohesive and coalition-based form of politics. But that's just my bugbear. I felt that way.
No, fair enough. We covered that a little on yesterday's show as well. I'm moving in a similar direction. I've got the word atrophy popping up in my mind as you speak. A sense that the system as it stands is in a state of atrophy, and the only politician who's saying we need a different system as opposed to we need to tweak the one we've got is Jeremy Corbyn.
I absolutely think so, and I think, again, one has to, whenever you're making a decision, it's not enough just to say, why would I vote for that person? Part of the question is, why won't I vote for the other? And again, I come back to that, and I think looking at Theresa May and the Tories, I've heard nothing fresh, nothing new, nothing radical in a good sense from them at all, just a preaching back to, quite frankly, Victorian values that, the Victorian values were appalling for most working men and women.
And for children, and for children up chimneys as well. I mean, it wasn't confined to the adults, was it? And Peter, thank you very much indeed. He mentioned Brexit. As promised, I'm going to try and bring you, in the interest of balance, some bulletins from the organisations that campaigned most strenuously to leave the European Union. So after the next break, I shall give you the very latest contributions to the debate from the Leave Alliance, who tweet us at LeaveHQ. Because, you've got to hear what the other side have got to say. Language is so important, isn't it? Are you trying to avoid the word cult, but trying to understand whether or not there is anything more? And I don't really mean this as an insult anymore, or indeed as a criticism, because this a desperate attempt that I've been embarked upon for a couple of years to try and make sense of stuff that I find at best dispiriting and at worst profoundly depressing. It boils down to the state of your sensibilities. Do you feel things are going to get better if you back that horse, or if you stay on this horse? I think that applies to Brexit, although, God, I wish people hadn't fallen for all the lies they were told that are now coming home to roost. You're on a horse. You don't see any way in which your life could get better. Somebody tells you that the reason why your life is not getting better is because of EU membership or immigration or whatever it may be. I now understand why you would jump off that horse. You don't have to have a racist or a bigoted bone in your body. You possibly are open to accusations of gullibility, but I suppose the more frustrated you are with the way things are going, the more amenable you are to that voice in your ear that says things don't have to be like this. Unfortunately, they've got worse. And that, I guess, is my fear with Corbyn. So I am completely amenable to the voice in my ear that says things don't have to be like this. But if that's all he's really got, an alternative to the way things are now. I've got huge problems with the way things are now. I bore you for Britain on the subject every single blinking day. Whether we're talking about property, whether we're talking about 0 hours contracts, whether we're talking about the erosion of work terms and conditions, the castration of trade unions, the ludicrous scapegoating of the poorest people in our country for the sins of the richest. I could go on forever. In fact, many mornings I do. But has he got anything more than what the Brexit campaign has had? That's the question. I should probably apologise for taking an hour and 8 minutes to get to it. What's the difference between Corbyn and Brexit? When Brexit whispered in the ears of people who couldn't see how things were going to get better under the current set of circumstances, they came along and whispered. I mean, the nasty ones whispered, blame foreigners. The less nasty ones whispered, blame the EU. They make all our rules. All nonsense. All now emerging as absolute hogwash. But the less faith you had in the future, the more likely you were to reject the present. Has Corbyn got any more than his other Brexit admirers than comforting words about a theoretical future? Joseph is in St Austell. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Well, I think I could probably count myself into the category of being a cult follower, and I don't think I'd be particularly uncomfortable with that.
It's a rare outbreak of honesty.
Well, see, because traditionally speaking, apart from the snap election that's just happened, in previous elections I've voted Conservative.
Yes.
But I don't know what it is. I don't know why I can't stop myself supporting Corbyn.
Well, let's work it out. Do you want to lie down?
No, if possible.
What is it that you think he will give you that no one else can?
Well, again, this is the thing. I don't think a lot of the sort of policy ideas that they come out with, I'm not convinced they could ever implement successfully, but I believe that he believes in what he's saying, and I think that's it. I think that when I listen to him speak, there's an honesty that isn't there with any other politician that I've probably ever heard since I've been able to vote.
And what do you mean? I don't mean to be rude. Yeah, I get that. There's bits of it connect with me, but I can't make the final leap like you've done. I mean, when you say he seems to be honest, does he really? I mean, doesn't he just have that beautiful privilege of opposition that Boris Johnson, what you might call paradigm, where he can have his cake and eat it? He can say things don't have to be like this without saying how they're going to be different. Sorry, I talked over you talking over me.
Yeah, no, sorry. I don't think that's the case. When you listen to Boris talk, there's obvious agenda there. There's always obvious agenda there, and it really shines through. I don't get it with Corbyn.
He doesn't seem to be doing it for... Here you go. I said to one of the lads on the news desk this morning, I said, we should actually ban people with political ambition from high office. The only circumstances in which anyone should be allowed over the threshold of 10 Downing Street is if they're dragged kicking and screaming into the office because the country has decided they'd be brilliant at a job, but they really, really don't want it. Jeremy Corbyn isn't quite in that category, but he certainly seems to be free of traditional political ambition. But again, I'm about to mention Michael Foot, which is not exactly what you'd call a sparkling example.
No, but I mean, in all honesty, that was way before my time, and to be honest, I hadn't really been engaged with politics until sort of the last 10 years.
Fair enough.
What was I going to say with Jeremy, especially this speech yesterday, he didn't mention once about being Prime Minister, and because that's what you were saying, he doesn't appear to be self-serving in that he appears to be craving that top job. He seems to be craving Labour being into power and having the opportunity
that they can do
to
things,
try and implement what they're doing.
Whereas when you ask Boris Johnson why he wants to be Prime Minister, he'll say, well, because I wrote it on my CV in my final year at Eton, and it's the only thing that hasn't come true yet.
Exactly, and you can see and you can feel that in Boris when he speaks, and several other Tory politicians as well. And with Theresa May, the way that she's conducted herself since she's taken office, it's all been she's had several opportunities to change, but she's always got the opportunity. She's craving for power. And it turns so many people off. It's turned me off. You know, I could never vote for her. And the
because you don't understand why she wants to be Prime Minister.
No, there's no reason.
I don't either. Actually,
she doesn't give us any. She doesn't give us any reason through the whole campaign of the last general election that she called. Since that election, she's actually given us no reason to think, you know, of the reasons why she wants to be Prime Minister, other than it's a powerful job. That seems to be the only thing that she's got.
I guess if you've spent your life in Parliament, then, you know, you lose sight of the whys and focus only on the whats. What do you want? I want to be Prime Minister. Why do you want it? I've forgotten.
Well, I do think this is why so many people... Yeah, well, this is why so many people connect with Corbyn, the fact that he's completely detached from what everybody's used to. And whether it's successful or not...
You could say that. I mean, a lot of what you've said I could say about Trump, mate, and that's not exactly a ringing endorsement.
I know.
It makes Michael Foot look like the Messiah, but still, it's not a ringing. He's very different. He does things differently. I mean, his ambition isn't necessarily, doesn't have an overweening desire to be president. I mean, maybe not the last.
I do think there's so many people. I do think there's so many people like me who have lived on, you know, mid to late 30s, comfortable life, but the status quo, it just isn't. It just doesn't seem to be enough. People crave change a lot of the time, whether it comes in a good or a bad form.
Yeah, that's why I opened the programme by asking how long it takes if you've actually been hungry. How long does it take before knowing that you're going to have a full belly tonight means you are now looking for something more? If you've been homeless, if you've worried about bombs dropping on your head, you will have that little period of stability, but then you'll start wanting a bigger house. Then you'll start wanting more. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the most powerful evolutionary drive that the human species has. But if you're staring at society today and seeing what Joseph describes as a status quo and not really seeing any way in which your lot will get better, and I don't mean the penny in your pocket, I also mean your access to the health services, your children's schooling, all of these things that are being cut by the current government. And Jeremy Corbyn stands up and says, well, we shouldn't be doing this. And everybody shouts, of course, well, how are you going to pay for it? And they kind of, quite rightly point out, as he did yesterday, that Theresa May found £1 billion down the back of the sofa when the DUP came calling. Paul's in wind. Actually, it's just coming up to 15:15. I'll come to you first after the break, Paul. I'm just, as promised, going to provide, for reasons of Brexit balance, this is the latest bulletin from the Leave Alliance, which campaigned vociferously to leave the European Union. It should take about a minute. If the Tories had done their sums, they know there is no possibility Brexit will be concluded before the election. They must also know by now that there's no possibility of them winning the next general election. They've blown that. They know that by then Labour will have something approximating a workable position on Brexit that's better than theirs. At the very least, that will entail the single market, and that's why the Tories will walk out of talks very soon. These Tories would actually torch the entire British economy for the sake of leaving and preventing a moderate process. Most of them think the WTO option is workable. You're dealing with some exceptionally stupid and blinkered people here. I just remind you, this is from the Leave Alliance. And some very, very deeply corrupt influences pushing for a fire sale of UK assets. They are manipulating Tory ignorance. We do not think there is a sincere effort to conclude a deal with the EU. This whole thing is a sham, pure theatricals. We'll find out what one of the main performers, David Davis, has had to say about the latest round of talks that is, you may not have noticed, due to end today. 11:15 is the time. You just don't get it, do you, was the refrain after Brexit. I'm not hearing it so much now. We're still a few days away, or possibly even a few years away, from saying, I'm really sorry, James, you were the one that did get it. It was me that was a gullible fool. I'm getting some of that, although obviously it's not, I wouldn't want it to be couched in such pejorative terms. You just don't get it, do you? Well, I do, actually. If the status quo, whatever we mean by that, the way things are, offers you no real hope of self-improvement in your life, whether it's about access to health services or whether it's about pay rises in your pocket. If you look at the status quo and you can't see things getting better for you, it doesn't really matter how good they are. Long periods of peace and stability breed a sort of almost a complacency. So rather than being thankful for what we've got, I mean, how many days do you wake up and be thankful that you're not a refugee? You don't, do you? If you go to church occasionally, you get reminded of how lucky you are to have the most basic of conditions. But how often do you wake up and thank the whatever God you believe in, or don't thank your lucky stars that you're not in the middle of a war zone? How often do you wake up and thank your lucky stars that you went to bed with a full belly last night? How often do you wake up and thank your lucky stars that you can't see the lucky stars above your head because you've actually got a roof up there? How often do you wake up and thank your lucky stars that you didn't wake up in a shop doorway this morning? You don't do it unless you've been in a shop doorway, unless you've been in a war zone, unless you've been a refugee, unless you've gone to bed hungry. You only really recognise what you've got when it's gone. Don't take my word for it. Joni Mitchell wrote a whole song about it. And that, I think, is the thing that you don't get. You don't know what it's like to not believe that anything's going to get better. The weird thing is, everybody feels like that, except a tiny, tiny minority at the very, very top. But if you whisper the right poison into people's ears, you can get them to act against their own interests in the belief that this might improve things. Jeremy Corbyn, I don't think, is trying to get people to act against their own interests, but I still don't necessarily believe that a vote for him wouldn't constitute acting against our own interests. What's the difference between Brexit and Corbyn? To be fair, he'd be on the same side of both arguments. Is it just simply saying things don't have to be like this? In terms of socialism or redistribution of wealth, he's actually right. There is room for improvement. Brexit was bogus. But in terms of what the message is and why people are receptive to it, am I insulting both sides, one side or neither? Dan's in York. Dan, what would you like? I've got a phone line free, actually, if you've been trying to get through. Stop texting me complaining. It's not my fault things are so busy. 0345 606 0973. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener. First time I've got through to you.
You're very welcome. I'm picking up listeners like nobody's business in Yorkshire. I'm very proud of that. Dan, I'll be honest with you. Go on.
I don't understand you. You're very pro-Remain, like me, because you believe it will be better for the country to stay in the European Union.
I do now. I just, if we're going to talk about me, then I need to make sure we're getting it accurately. I do believe that now. In the run-up to the vote, I was not particularly knowledgeable or fully cognizant of what the European Union recommends. So my vote was built upon a fear of racist backlashes, which had already started happening and which I've been proved 120% right about. But now I am a much more enthusiastic student of what the European Union does for its members.
You've been talking for quite a while about people being worse off out of the EU, having less money in their pockets, as well as the racist backlash.
Yes, I have, since the vote, but not before.
But because of that, I don't understand why you are so sort of questioning about Corbyn, because
Nor
it's a
do I.
similar sort of thing. He wants people to be better off, especially like me and you. We're going to be all right, but people who are poor off, scraping the breadline and stuff. These are the kind of people who Corbyn really wants to help.
I know. I just don't quite. What is it that I'm confused by? You're confused by why I'm confused. I guess I don't know that I need more than simply saying things don't have to be like this. Things can only get better. It's all a bit D-ream, isn't it? And I want to see a roadmap. I want to know how. And probably because of Brexit, because I went into the Brexit vote quite ignorant and gave the benefit of the doubt to some of the decent people on the Leave side who told us we were heading towards sunny uplands and all sorts of improvements. And I didn't ask for evidence enough. So now I think I'm asking for evidence and he can't really provide any, which doesn't matter to you. And I envy you.
Well, I never said that. To me, it's not about his personality or, as you're trying to put it, the cult of Corbyn. I'm a Labour member as of last year, but the year before I voted Green, the year before that I voted Lib Dem, so I'm a changing voter, and I try and look at every single party, what they're offering, and I try and vote as to what I think will be the best for everyone in the country, as opposed to my own personal situation.
I'd like to say the same, but I don't. What is it that convinced you Corbyn could deliver on the things that you want to see happen?
His policies make sense. So if you look at the likes of Scandinavia, where he wouldn't even be considered that radical.
No, it's a point I often make. You're quite right.
Scandinavia's got one of the best sort of standards of living, one of the best life expectancies, lowest infant mortality rate. There's got to be something behind that.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to argue with you on any of that, but his ability to deliver it under a two-party or a first-past-the-post electoral system in a country that's dominated by the right-wing media. Do I sound like I'm making excuses now?
That's the thing, but we need people like you, if you believe it, to kind of get the word out there. And if you believe in Corbyn...
I don't believe in Corbyn.
Speak up for him.
I believe in some of the things he believes in.
Is it because you don't believe in his policies, or you don't believe he can do it because of the right-wing media?
No, it's a little bit of that. I mean, although yesterday he took the fight to the Daily Mail, which is, and it's going to sound like a name drop, the one occasion when I met Ed Miliband, I berated him for not having gone after the Daily Mail because the world was changing. I think that Corbyn proved that yesterday. He's not going to court them because they're never going to throw him a bone. So he quite rightly went after them. And you've seen with Brexit how much power the right-wing media has when it gets to persuade people to do something that's going to be bad for them but good for the owners. A lot of the people who own newspapers in this country can't wait to get their hands on some of the NHS assets and profit from them. You know that as well as I do. Do I believe that he can... I guess I'm troubled by the fact he couldn't even take the Parliamentary Labour Party with him. So how is he going to take a country?
A lot of the power with Labour is in the NEC, and now there's 2 extra Corbyn support has been voted to the NEC, so hopefully the infighting in the Labour Party will be at an end now.
Yes? So what's next?
Next, it's going to be grassroots manoeuvement to get him elected at the next election. I mean, you saw how many seats he got. He did better than Ed Miliband, so it's all about people power, social media to get the word out of Corbyn. Oh, sorry, more likely his policies. So renationalisation, you were talking about it either yesterday or the day before, and it was just massively popular, was the idea of nationalisation.
Yes, no, I mean, and that, again, I guess...
You're going to shout at me in a minute and go, oh, no, we don't believe in experts anymore.
No, of course, well, how dare you. Touche, Daniel, touche on that one, absolutely. Although there are plenty of economists who would be profoundly troubled by what he said about rent control yesterday and elements of his economic policy, but it's a hell of a lot more balanced in terms of economic expertise than Brexit ever was. So, yeah, I mean, you're making me feel like a Brexiter, which kind of... I don't know whether that proves my point or dismantles it. I'm drawing parallels between Corbyn and the Brexit movement. I haven't really got much detail, but I promise you things will be better. The difference for me is that the things he says will be better, I want to be better. The things that Brexit people told me would be better, I knew weren't true. I knew that Parliament was sovereign. I knew that we had a very big say in what legislation was passed in Brussels. I knew that we could... I didn't know the degree to which we could control our borders, but I did know that immigration wasn't impacting in wages and job security for the very simple reason that when more people are here, supply and demand go up. I think that's probably the thickest contribution to immigration debates, isn't it? Supply and demand. You don't understand the most basic roots of supply and demand. Well, I do. That's why I know that any new person in a market is bringing both supply and demand. Therefore, the market grows, and that's what economic growth depends on. Dan, thank you. Pause for thought. Paul in Windsor. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm very interested in the question, the difference between Corbyn and Brexit, and I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I'm going to give you my take.
Come on.
I think Brexit was a revolt, and I think a lot of people who voted for Brexit didn't really know what they were voting and all the detail, and didn't really understand.
A lot of people who voted Remain would fit that category as well.
Yeah. And as this whole Brexit journey is, we're on this Brexit train, we're all beginning to learn a little bit more about the EU and a little bit more about how complicated the whole thing is,
yes,
and how it's not. It's not as simple as they told us at all. But I think Brexit was a revolt, and I think it was a revolt against the economic model. I think it was a revolt against the Conservatives and austerity. I think it was a revolt between the difference between the North and the South. I think it was a revolt against freedom of movement, and I don't mean racism and xenophobia, but I think freedom of movement was abused by the government. I think it was abused by companies as well. Let's get all these migrants in, on you go, pay your tax, we'll keep the money. All your communities that have had to absorb all these migrants, you've got to squeeze up, no more money for your...
Except, just as a caveat, the areas with the highest rates of immigration generally voted to remain in the European Union.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and a very good point as well.
Same with the AfD in Germany, actually. With support for the AfD across on the east because they're really spooked by immigrants that live on the west side of the country.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I still think there was a revolt against...
There's a revolt against everything, wasn't it, in many ways, because it became all things to all people. It was left-wing and right-wing. It was pro-free market and anti-free market. It was globalist and anti-globalist. It was just the more distressed you were, the more unhappy you were, the more susceptible you were to whatever words were being poured into your ear.
Okay, so Corbyn was a revolt. First of all, it was a revolt in the Labour Party, and that turned into a revolution, and he won that battle, and he's now won the party. The war is over.
He has, hasn't he?
All the players in the Labour Party, all the players that have been there, the Labour establishment, the kind of professional Blair-esque.
Well, they're all on side now because they think they've got a chance of keeping their jobs with him in charge, and that, I guess in terms of self-interest, that's the first box you need to tick.
Well, I think they're all on side. Some of them did stand down in 2017. Lots of them just left. They are on side. They're not necessarily committed to the Corbyn programme, but they are on side. But I think where the difference is, and I've seen this, and I'm from the old moderate side of the Labour Party. And
I'm late for the news, Paul, as ever. Perennially late for the news. So give me it in a nutshell.
Well, I just think that Corbyn is now starting to make a transition towards being inclusive.
Yeah.
I think I'm seeing with John McDonnell, he's spending a lot of time listening to, engaging with the Federation of Small Business, the CBI, etc. Boardrooms. He spends a lot of time in boardrooms talking to boards about what Labour want to do and all the rest of it. And I think that Corbyn's agenda now is to, keep his depth but broaden his appeal. And I think he will actually achieve that. And when he does, then I think you'll see him as Prime Minister. And that will be the difference between Brexit and Corbyn. Brexit will come to nothing. I don't think it will happen. I think it will hit the buffers and fall to bits. Everyone will get fed up with it. Corbyn, I think, will become Prime Minister, and he may be a very transformative Prime Minister.
Or he may become Prime Minister and then hit his very own set of buffers. Only time will tell. But I'd still envy your optimism, and I mean that most sincerely. 11:32 is the time. That was very strong from Gary. I've lost it now. A tweet came in. I was sort of making some unlikely parallels between the Brexit vote and the support for Jeremy Corbyn. Gary points out Gary suggests, Gary Barker, Brexit was voted for by those who believe what Tories have done to them was done by the EU, but Corbyn voters know it was the Tories. What did it? I added the what did it. Gary's far too literate. I kind of feel that was a penny drop moment for me. I sense a lot of you who like Jeremy Corbyn, who believe, and you'd probably say that, having listened to the programme, you consider our politics to be quite similar. I describe it as Christian democracy in the simplest terms. You don't have to be a Christian to subscribe to these school of thoughts, but I don't think I'm a very nice person without it. I wonder whether I would have been a sort of ramping, chomping fascist if it wasn't for the influence of Christianity and nuns and monks from a very early age in my life. Just that simple message that you should look after those who are less fortunate than yourself. You should love your neighbour as yourself. You should always endeavour to be the best you can be, and then neatly crystallised by that wonderful prophet of Christianity, Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan, who of course opined that the most important thing you can do in life is be excellent to each other. Christianity helps me adopt that worldview. So when you say we've got similar politics, you mean you worry about people less fortunate than you. You think that there should be a sort of sense of society in place that means those at least fortunate get the most help. Of course, what conservative ideology does in some contexts, but not all, is remove the context of luck from the equation. How many times have we mentioned this recently? It's another penny drop moment for me. And I say I'm lucky. Some people get cross, usually people from a similar background, but possibly more generations of public school education. That's not luck. We work bloody hard for our money, old boy. So we are very lucky. You know, I mean, there are plenty of people, pal, who are cleverer than you that were born in straitened circumstances who could knock you into a cocked hat in any professional head-to-head, but they're never going to get the chance because they left school at 15 and went, so, well, I come off it, you know. That's what entitlement means. I don't really lie awake at night worrying about the fact that 167 prime ministers all went to the same school, but it does speak of a system that is completely skewed. So to suggest that being born on the right side of a skewed system isn't lucky, or having parents who broke through that divide, pushed through glass ceilings, crossed Rubicons of social mobility in the 1950s and 60s and 70s so that you have membership of clubs that they could only ever dream of belonging to. It makes you move faster at work. It opens doors that remain closed to everybody else. It gives you advantages that you literally don't know exist unless you're born with them. But when people like me say that, people from a similar background get very, very cross because they don't want to admit that most of it's luck. They want to believe that they were born on first base. Want to believe that they were born on 0-0, not at 3-0. It's white privilege as well. It's astonishing that people now on both sides of the Atlantic argue that being white doesn't give you automatic advantages in life. Not getting shot by police in America would be fairly high on the list for carrying a toy gun. That kind of thing. But it's just this notion that people who don't feel they've got enough absolutely hate being told that they've actually got more than most. So, Black Lives Matter. Oh, how dare they? How dare they suggest that Black Lives Matter should matter as much as white lives? Let's pretend that we think that they want to matter more. How dare they? Look, I've got a rubbish life. How dare you point out that it's better than other people? So immigration. Somebody from a poverty-stricken part of the country is told that the reason why they're poverty-stricken is because of immigration. They're going to think the immigrants have got a better deal than they've got. Nobody wants to be told that they've actually been very lucky. Even rich people don't want to admit that they're lucky. They want to claim that they've got some genius, some absolute magical gift to make loads of cash. Chances are you're a sociopath. Balzac got it right. Behind every great fortune, there's a great crime. No, it's not luck, it's talent. And Trump is the apotheosis of that. Literally luck on legs. But he believes he's some sort of genius. And these weird little acolytes around him are sort of enthralled to what? To money, to wealth. So, bring it back to Britain. Corbyn effectively saying the reason why you haven't got enough is because of the people who've got the most. And that I like. But I can't get into bed with him. I don't know why. 11:41 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What's the difference between Corbyn and Brexit? Is it simply telling people who feel frustrated that things could be different? Or is Corbyn the real deal, as opposed to a completely bogus set of promises as evinced by Brexit? Andy is in queue. Andy, what would you like to say?
Well, good morning, Jeremy.
Hello. Get on with it.
You have been saying the reason why you're conflicted is because you know that deep down, Jeremy Corbyn is saying things that most human beings believe in. When it comes to a general election, which will be, it might be sooner, it might be later.
Yeah.
We all should vote. And are you seriously telling me, James, that you're going to vote for anyone other? I mean, you can't vote Conservative. I listen to you every day.
I have voted Conservative in the past.
So have I.
Yeah.
So have I. I voted for Thatcher. I was young. Okay?
You're older than me.
I'm a little bit older than you. And about 10 years. But the very simple point I'm trying to make is, go back to Michael Foot and all those shambles. Maybe capitalism hadn't quite played out to the level it's done now. And I'm not saying capitalism is wrong, but it needs regulation. Look at Ryanair, look at Uber. If there isn't a bigger, argument for regulation, then those two companies, just get away with murder, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think the Prime Minister's talked about capitalism and what a success the last 20 years has been. Well, hello? The last
for whom?
Thank you.
Yeah.
For whom? For a very small elite. Jeremy Corbyn, when he went to Grenfell, people were hugging him. When the Prime Minister went there, they were trying to throw stuff at him.
Well, she had to hide. She had to hide. But again, I mean, that doesn't go
There
on.
is an empathy for Corbyn. There's an empathy for Corbyn. And he's preaching hope and love over hatred and division. And it's real. I was in Brighton.
How do you know it's real?
Because he's done it he came in 1983, I lived in Trustall Park. He knocked on my door. I was a Tory voter, and I said, Mr. Corbyn, I've been waiting for you. You're the new Labour candidate, and you support the IRA. Come and talk to me about this. And he sat down in my kitchen table for 10 minutes, and he said to me, look, we have to talk to these people. There is going to be war will not end it. We have to talk. I believe in talking, jaw, come on. Where are we?
And listen, it's weird this, because Willie Whitelaw was talking to IRA terrorists 10 years prior to that, but of course it didn't get reported for 20 years. He was meeting in Paul Shannon's house on Cheney Walk with Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams in 1973.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about luck, man, watch Nick Hanauer's TED Talk. Nick Hanauer was one of the original investors in Amazon. Basically, it's called March of the Pitchforks. Basically, he's saying get the minimum wage in the US up to $15 now.
Yeah.
And don't wait. And basically, he's saying, I'm lucky because I was born in the United States of America. If I'd been born in Africa or in parts of Asia, I would not have been a founder of Amazon. Thank you.
It goes with if Steve Jobs had stayed in Syria, he wouldn't have set up Apple, would he? But coming to America as a refugee and being adopted has given the country one of the biggest employers, or at least one of the biggest cash cows that it has. So, I don't like to over-personalise things, but some days it is like a therapy session. You clearly listen quite closely. You clearly have picked over the carcass of some of my comments. What do you think my problem is?
I think your problem's the same problem as I've got, which is that we have got this cognitive dissonance, which is about economics and saying we just can't keep borrowing money. And yet we've got a Tory government who have, by the way, doubled our national debt since 2010, and no one seems to know about it. They talk deficit. It's a deceit. Deficit people don't understand. What the Labour Party are saying is, let's borrow the same amount of money as the Tories have, and let's see what we do when we use it differently. And I think that's it. That's where we are. We are bankrupt, so we need to get on with it. We need to fight our way out of this, and more of the same is not an option anymore. I'm sorry.
I like you.
I like you too.
Are you over the line then? Because regardless of how you vote in individual constituencies, if it was a national vote, if it was, Corbyn versus May, you'd be fully Corbyn.
Well, I'm actually one of the founding patrons for United, and what we're trying to do is bring politics back to the centre by working with MPs of any party to just let's go down the middle. But do you know what? If it comes to a straight fight at the next general election, I'm not going to stand by and watch the Tories slip into power yet again. I've had enough of them.
And you voted for Margaret Thatcher in 1979. I love these conversations. I feel so lucky to be able to have them. And historically, radio phone-ins are confined to people who've never changed their mind since the moment they were born, 11:46. Mine isn't changing, though, and a lot of you are accusing me of being all the things I normally rail against, conditioned by right-wing media. Emma, one of my favourite correspondents, writes, "This is why a false equivalence now between left and right is so dangerous. We're so far over to the right that now people are actually getting hurt by it. Any further and we'll start breaking society. We're already sacrificing our generations of youth to the crumbling vampire of capitalism. It can get much worse. I don't want it to get worse." It's just one, if we come out of the European Union, one border dispute with France, the whole country is in meltdown. The lorries parked up the motorway, can't get out of the country, customs checks in Calais, food can't get in. It's an apocalyptic vision, which, again, I got from the Twitter feed of one of the most prominent Leave campaigning organisations. It's 11:47. History Hour is around the corner. Before that, a little bit more attempt to map the similarities, and for my purposes, I have to concede or confess, more importantly, the differences between the Brexit promise that things don't have to be like this and somehow they could be better, and the Corbyn promise that things don't have to be like this and somehow they could be better, because as the wheels fall off the first promise, more and more people seem to be signing up to the second one. One of the most tireless chroniclers of the wheel falling off process is former Leaver turned ardent Remainer Ian Dunt, author of Brexit, What Happens Next, who joins me on the line now just to run us through the latest press conference from David Davis and Michel Barnier. Theoretically, Ian, Theresa May's speech last week, although it contradicted a lot of what David Davis has said in the past, it should have been rather encouraging to Michel Barnier.
Yeah, and it looks like it was. So he came out today, the quote he just offered stood next to David Davis, much warmer press conference than the one we had last time, where it looked like they were going to stab each other at any minute, was that it had changed the dynamic. That's a direct quote. So that doesn't mean that it's all done and dusted and we can move on to the future relationship and all of that. He said it might be weeks, it might be months before that can happen. But clearly what he was saying to her was basically, look, we heard what you said. Those two offers on transition and on money were what we asked for. You've given them to us. We recognise that, and we can now start moving forward a little bit faster.
So moving away from the they can whistle for it kind of school of thought, and acknowledging A, the necessity of paying a divorce bill, and B, the impossibility of having everything done and dusted by March 2019.
Well, it goes a little bit further than that, actually, because what she offered was, look, I get that there has to be transition. There does. Nobody thinks that we can do this by March 2019. But I will accept all of the EU rules and regulations during that period. Now, before, she'd hardly even talked about transition, but when she did, she wanted it to be bespoke. So she wanted negotiations for the transition and then negotiations for the final state. What she's done now is to say there'll be no negotiations for transition. We will be basically an EU member in everything but name while we continue these negotiations. The EU had demanded that as part of the mandate. Barnier had said over and over again, you've got to provide it. And during that speech, he said, fine, I give in, I will do it. And today, he basically recognised that and welcomed it.
And not least because there's 4-point-something million people in all 28 member countries whose futures are still very much in the balance. So retaining those freedoms, retaining those regulations, at least provides them with a modicum of stability for the period of transition. But Boris Johnson, Ian, is still saying that freedom of movement will end in March 2019.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Looking at the stuff that he was saying out there this week, he is basically now operating as a completely independent foreign secretary.
Well, he's begging to be sacked, isn't he? He's begging to be sacked because resigning looks like weakness.
Yeah, he's begging for a sacking. He absolutely is. And of course, if he got the sacking, he'd then be able to present himself as the real Brexit guy who wouldn't make any compromises. I suspect, by the way, that if she was pushing the other way, he might be tempted to present himself as the soft Brexit guy who really thinks he's just on a bit.
Surely you're not suggesting that Boris Johnson is a principal free opportunist, Ian Dunt?
Yeah, and the thought had never crossed my mind. There's always political space in the Brexit debate, whichever way you go, for someone to say, the other way would be better. And I think he's basically jumping around that as much as he can. Now, May's still got a bit of an issue because there's this draft resolution in front of the EU Parliament, which is going to be coming out just before her own conference speech, where they are basically going to vote to say that not enough has happened for them to move on. Doing that for a pretty good basis. There's 3 points there. One of them is basically sort of the ECJ and Aquis. She's kind of signed up to that. She's okay. The other one is really the way that the Home Office has been treating immigrants, European immigrants in this country,
yes,
which is quite savage in their attacks on. And the other is progress on things like Ireland, which again there hasn't been enough of. So while she's got these warm words from Barnier, it's not as if suddenly everything is roses. She is going to face a pretty humiliating moment, I think, next week when almost certainly the European Parliament votes against further progress. And that'll show again just how weak a negotiating hand is just before she goes to the Tory party conference. And that's not even to mention, as you sort of did, the people around the cabinet table who are also trying to stab her.
And to clarify, these terms and conditions for further negotiations were both formalised and agreed to months ago. So this slightly odd rearguard action from some elements of the right-wing press, that the divorce deal, the Irish border, the rights and freedoms, privileges of the 3 million living here, that we signed up to getting that sorted before we moved on to the next stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, this stuff has been public for months. The EU, to their credit, they're not usually so with it, but actually they've been pretty with it on the Brexit stuff. You know, almost as soon as this happened, they started putting out really quite transparent public process, saying what their priorities are, saying what the limit of what Barnier could do. This is it. When people start blaming Barnier and saying he's punishing us, yes, he doesn't actually have that much freedom of manoeuvre himself. He set a pretty strict mandate. And the mandate had said throughout that this was the case. So there's only so much you can praise Theresa May for the speech she made last week, when really it was this speech she should have made a year ago, when it was clear what the limitations of the British position were and the only ways in which we could get further.
So she's recognised reality 7 months or 17 months before we leave?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you know, that is true. That seems to me a very low benchmark by which to grade, you know, the talents of a British Prime Minister. You'd want them to recognise reality as soon as it was quite clear.
Why do you think she didn't? Because you follow this more closely than, frankly, anybody should have to. But why do you think she didn't? Because you can see the self-interest in the case of Boris Johnson, as we've alluded to. I hesitate to say it out loud, but I think I can see a intellectual inadequacy is the reason why some other people in that camp have failed to acknowledge reality. But Theresa May doesn't historically seem to suffer from either of those conditions. Why has it taken her so long simply to see the light, to recognise reality is the phrase I'm sticking with?
I used to say the same thing, but there's only so long that someone can keep on demonstrably being very foolish before you have to say, well, maybe they really are foolish. And we all sort of thought of her as this grown-up politician.
Yes.
But suddenly, when you take stock, and you look back on her career at the Home Office, and you look back on her career at her time at Downing Street, you see strategic error after strategic error, you see failures of understanding, you see misrepresentations of the objective conditions in which she operates, and the literal truth of the law by which she is supposed to follow, both as a Secretary of State and Prime Minister. And you're forced to come to the conclusion that, you know what, maybe actually at the end of it, it's quite a simple question, and she just isn't that smart.
She's just not very bright. She's not a cynical opportunist, but she's just not, I mean, possibly close to being the bluntest knife in the drawer. And one of the best ways to disguise that is to stay quiet and get a reputation as a safe pair of hands. Whereas Ian Dunt reminds us the Home Office was operating in practically special measures for most of her time in charge. Ian's book, Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now? I've run out of time to ask him whether any of his predictions haven't come true. He's also the brilliant editor at politics.co.uk. And that's it for politics for us this week. Up next, after the news bulletin, it's Mystery Hour. Book your berth on the switchboard now.